This week, we're going to continue working on more advanced aspects of ArcGIS Online. We're specifically going to be using those data that help us to sort by attributes and then to add some extra styling to those attributes. So let's begin where we began before by looking at some of the group information that is listed for our class. And you'll remember that I have some feature layers here that include data that allow us to sort by attributes. I just clicked on trade as a percent of GDP, and this again is World Trade Organization data that comes from 2024. And once I've clicked on that, I'm going to go ahead and open that up in Mapped Viewer. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to save this map someplace where I can find it. So go ahead and save the map as is. We don't want to save this particular layer with something else. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a title, and I'm going to call it Trade Comparison. And I will save it in my Geography 390A file. Now, once I've saved that file, and once I've given the symbology the time to load right here, I can go ahead and I can start to modify the properties so that I am able to look at the data that I want to look at. And what I've decided to do right now is to look at two different years, 1995, and compare that to 2020. In order to do that, I'm going to edit the layer style, because right now it just has this sort of generalized color for all the countries. And once I do that, I can go ahead and I can choose a specific attribute field. And I'm going to click on the field that shows me the 1995 data. After I've added the 1995 data, it's going to symbolize it automatically as a choropleth map. And that's actually what I want to do right now. Just take a look at how this all looks as a comparison of one country versus another. So some of these files do take a little bit of time to load. And so you might have to wait a little bit as each of these attributes loads onto your map. I just had to wait about 30 seconds or so for this to populate, but now it has, and it shows the countries that have a high percentage of trade as their GDP in 1995 in darker blue colors. I'm going to go ahead and add another field because it is useful to make comparisons one to the other, and that's one of the things I'd like to stress is a good thing to do with this map. So I'm going to add the 2002 map. 2020 data as well. And then when I do that, it's going to actually sort of auto-populate that as graduated circles. I don't really want the graduated circles. They're a little bit better to show data that hasn't been normalized. I instead want to click on the style that allows us to compare one to another. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And again, it might take a little bit of time for that to come up. But what it does essentially is it shows areas that had a high GDP that was involved in trade that has now gotten lower in 2020 as a bluish color, and those areas where trade has become hotter are actually shown in red. So as a start, this is a good way to show how we can have a couple of different attributes of data that are selected here. But then the next thing I want to show you is how you can do some styling choices. And I'm going to just choose a couple of these, but I encourage you to really experiment and figure out what you would like to do. I'm going to click on the FX button right here. And one thing that's very easy to use, I have found, is one that allows you to drop a shadow. So I'm going to drop a shadow, and it will drop that shadow as a black color, but you can adjust the color if you want to. So I'm not going to make any modifications to that. I'm just going to go ahead and count that as good, but you can see that there are a lot of different ways that you can modify the drop shadow. But now we have the same map, and you can see the areas that don't have data compared to the ones that do. That is a sort of a useful thing. There are other effects that you might want to experiment with it as well. Another thing that you can do to stylize your map is to work on the pop-ups. Right now, when we click a pop-up of the United States, I just clicked right on the polygon, you'll see that the data come up for all the years for which we have data and other stuff as well. But if we want to make a map that is a little bit more useful to us, we might want to go into the pop-up right here and actually change some of these pop-ups and edit them. So I'm going to go ahead now and hit the edit button for the pop-ups, and you can actually edit the individual names that you might want to call particular things. But another thing that you can actually do is to select the features that you actually want to. To do that, you want to click on the fields list down here, and it will bring all the fields up. And then you can actually go through and get rid of all the fields that you don't want. And of course, I only want to keep 1995 and 2020. So I'm going to do that quickly. I'm also going to go to the very bottom and get rid of these as well. But I'm going to keep at least one country name, or maybe the affiliated country here, based on what seems to make the most sense to me. So I've made those edits now. You can see that all that is left is 1995, 2020, and the country name. And so now I can get rid of that pop-up. And if I click on the United States now, you see that it only brings up the name of the country as well as the GDP for 1995 through 2020. And you can see that the change has not been very profound, but it has grown as a percentage of the GDP a little bit, which is why it's that sort of light reddish color right here. Another thing that you can experiment are the labels. And if I click on labels right here and I choose which label I'd like to add, it will allow me to have the country names come up, and automatically defaults to the country names simply because it knows well enough to do that. I can go ahead and get rid of the label features now, and you can see that everything is labeled. You might not want the labels to be there depending on the map and what you're trying to show, but it can be a useful thing. There are lots of other different types of ways, especially in the things that I've shown you, to customize your map and give it a little bit more styling. And what I'd like you to do is experiment with that. Once you have finished doing that, make sure that you save any changes that you've made. And then I would like you to go ahead and make it into an app. To create an app, you simply go to the Create App button. And you can just choose the Instant App. It's the easiest to use. It won't give you a lot of widgets and things like that, but you can at least make a basic map app that can easily be shared. If you want to be a little bit more complicated and mess around with things, I encourage you to use the Experience Builder. These are the two that are the most appropriate for a single map like this. And then you'll be able to share that map and the link to that map with everyone in the class, which I would like you eventually to do. Since we already talked about apps, I'm not going to do that right now, but you can experiment with that and discover what it is that you want to do. I'd like to also say that another thing that you can experiment with that I didn't show is to experiment with the properties. And here is where you can change the transparency of the map. You could also, if you wanted to, change the visibility to where we actually see the colors appear. Right now they appear at every level, but you might want to change that in one way or another. And of course, there are other ways to customize your map as well, including changing the base map, which is something that we've talked about in this class already. I've stuck with a very basic base map right here, but of course you can go to the dark gray canvas as we've talked about before, or one of the other base maps if you'd like to do that. So these are some of the things I'd like you to experiment with as you work towards completing a more advanced map and using different kinds of data and different kinds of styling. As always, I'm happy to make other videos, and we'll talk about this in class.